When I first moved out of my parents' place, I was 23, broke, and desperate to find somewhere cheap to live. I had been working at a small bookstore while trying to figure out what to do with my degree, and my savings were basically non existent. Craigslist was where I ended up looking, though even I knew that was a gamble. Every ad seemed sketchy, but I finally found one that looked decent. Two-bedroom apartment, close to downtown, rent split evenly at $400 each. The photos weren't great, but the ad was written in full sentences, which stood out compared to the half-baked listings filled with typos. The roommate's name was Dylan, and after a few messages back and forth, he invited me to come see the place. The apartment wasn't bad at all. It was older, the kind of building with beige carpets and wood paneling that had seen better days, but it was clean. Dylan was tall, lanky, maybe mid-20s like me, with shaggy brown hair and glasses. He seemed friendly, maybe a little awkward, but harmless. We chatted about work. He said he worked odd shifts at a warehouse, and he mentioned he mostly kept to himself. That sounded perfect to me. I moved in the next week with just my bed, a desk, and some boxes. At first, things went smoothly. Dylan wasn't around much. When he was quiet, though I did notice he had some strange habits. He kept his door locked at all times, even when he was home. I figured maybe he just liked his privacy, and that wasn't something I wanted to push on. The first strange thing I remember was waking up one night to use the bathroom and seeing Dylan just standing in the kitchen with the lights off. I only noticed him because the fridge light was open, casting a faint glow, and there he was, barefoot on the linoleum, staring into the dark. "Hey man, you okay?" I asked groggily. He flinched, turned toward me slowly, and smiled like he'd been caught off guard. "Yeah. Couldn't sleep. Just getting water." He shut the fridge, brushed past me, and went back into his locked room. At the time, I didn't think much of it, but it happened again, and then again. Always at night, always with him standing motionless in the dark until he noticed me. A couple of weeks in, I noticed food going missing. At first, I thought maybe I was just forgetting how much I had eaten, but it got obvious. An entire pizza I had bought was gone overnight, half a gallon of milk, and even random things like peanut butter and cereal. I didn't want to accuse him outright, so I mentioned casually, "Hey, have you noticed food disappearing? I think someone's been helping themselves." Dylan didn't even blink. "Yeah, weird. Maybe you just forgot you ate it?" His tone was flat, almost rehearsed. I dropped it because I didn't want to start an argument, but I knew it was him. One evening, I came home from work earlier than usual. Dylan hadn't heard me come in, and his door was slightly ajar, something I'd never seen before. I glanced inside, and I wish I hadn't. His room was almost completely bare. No posters, no decorations, not even a proper bed. Just a thin mattress on the floor, a desk covered in papers, and shelves stacked with notebooks. The walls were lined with scribbled writing, numbers, and what looked like diagrams. It wasn't like normal notes, more like obsessive scrawling, repeated phrases over and over. I didn't understand what I was looking at, but it made my stomach twist. Before I could look longer, Dylan appeared behind me. "What are you doing?" His voice was low, dangerous. I stammered out, "Sorry, man, I thought you weren't home. Your door was open." He stared at me for a long time before closing the door without saying a word. After that, the atmosphere shifted. He wasn't friendly anymore, not even on the surface. He barely spoke to me, but I could feel him watching. Sometimes when I was in the living room, I'd glance toward the hallway and catch his shadow under the door, like he was standing there silently. Other nights, I'd wake up and swear I heard his door opening, the faint creak of the carpet outside my room. One night, I woke up around 3 to the sound of scratching. At first, I thought it was mice in the walls, but it was too deliberate, too close. I sat up and realized it was coming from my bedroom door, long, slow drags of something hard against the wood. I froze, heart pounding, staring at the door. The scratching stopped, and then came a soft knock. "Evan," Dylan's voice whispered. I didn't answer. "Are you awake?" I stayed silent, pretending to breathe evenly like I was asleep. After a minute, I heard his footsteps retreat down the hall, his door shutting. I barely slept that night. The next day, I tried to act normal, but I couldn't stop thinking about it. I told myself I needed to move out, but breaking a lease wasn't easy. I started looking at other listings, trying to find a way out. Things escalated a week later. I came home from a late shift, exhausted, and as I set my bag down, I noticed something off in my room. My desk drawer was open. I always closed it. Inside, my notebooks had been flipped through, and some of my personal letters were scattered. Someone had been in my room. I confronted Dylan. "Hey, did you go in my room?" He looked at me blankly. "Why would I do that?" "Because my stuff was messed with." He smirked faintly. "Maybe you forgot you left it like that." The exact same phrasing as before. My stomach dropped. That night, I pushed my dresser in front of my door before I went to bed. It felt ridiculous, but I couldn't shake the fear. Around 2 in the morning, I woke to the sound of pressure against my door, like someone was pushing on it. The dresser rattled slightly, then silence. My heart hammered as I stared at the door in the dim light, waiting. Eventually, I heard him retreat again. I knew then I had to get out, no matter what. The final straw came a few nights later. I had been in the shower, the water running hot, when I swore I heard the bathroom door open. I froze, soap still in my hair, and listened. The curtain shifted slightly, like air had moved. I yanked it open, but no one was there. The door was locked, just like I had left it. My towel, though, had been moved from the rack to the floor. I barely dried off before locking myself in my room, shaking. The next morning, I decided I was leaving that day, lease or not. I called a friend with a truck, packed my essentials, and skipped work just to get out. Dylan watched me the entire time from the hallway, leaning against the wall with that faint smile that made my skin crawl. He didn't say anything, not even when I walked past him with the last box. When I finally shut the apartment door behind me, I felt like I could breathe for the first time in weeks. Later, after I had settled into a new place, I couldn't shake the curiosity. I looked up the building, the address, anything that might explain Dylan. That's when I found a post buried in a local forum. Someone asking if anyone had ever lived with a guy named Dylan who kept his room locked. The replies made my blood run cold. People describing the same behaviors. The late nights standing in the kitchen, the scratching at doors, the obsessive notebooks. One person claimed he had broken into their room at night, just standing there until they woke up and screamed. Another said they moved out after finding their pets dead under suspicious circumstances. I don't know who Dylan really was or why he was like that, but I do know I barely escaped something far darker than just a bad roommate. Story the end. When I moved to Minneapolis in the spring of 2020, I was 25, recently graduated, and struggling to find a stable job during the early months of the pandemic. My savings were tight, so I needed a place to live that was affordable, and living alone was out of the question. After scrolling through dozens of roommate ads online, I found one that seemed perfect. Room for rent in 3BR apartment near Uptown. $650 per month, utilities included. Quiet, professional roommate. No pets, available immediately. The post was vague, but had a few photos showing a neat living room, a small kitchen, and a tidy bedroom. The poster's name was Alex, a 29-year-old guy who worked nights at a security company. He mentioned he mostly kept to himself and that he had moved in last year. We met outside the building on a chilly Saturday afternoon. Alex was tall, wiry, with short black hair and dark eyes that seemed almost too focused, like he was analyzing everything. He smiled, shook my hand firmly, and led me inside. The apartment looked exactly like the photos, well-kept, modern, and quiet. He showed me the room, which was small but clean. Everything seemed fine. The first few days went smoothly. Alex worked nights, just like he said, and he kept to himself. We exchanged polite greetings in the morning and occasionally made small talk about groceries or the city. But within the first week, I noticed odd things. It started with the kitchen. I'd come home to find leftover food I hadn't touched, containers rearranged, or the fridge slightly ajar. At first, I assumed I'd left it that way, but it became too frequent to ignore. Then there was the noise. I'd be in bed, drifting off to sleep, and hear the faintest shuffling from the living room or hallway, even when Alex was supposed to be at work. I mentioned it casually one morning. Alex just shrugged. "Old building, floors creak," he said, but there was something in his tone that didn't sit right. A couple of weeks later, I found a small, unusual lockbox on the top shelf of his closet. It was old, metal, with a combination lock. I asked him about it, and he told me it held personal items he didn't want anyone touching. Fair enough. But the fact that it was always locked, even when he was home, started to make me uneasy. Then came the night of the first real scare. I woke up around 1 a.m. To the sound of soft whispering. I froze, trying to figure out if it was a dream. The whispering continued, low and indistinct, coming from the living room. I got out of bed and quietly cracked the door open. The apartment was dark, but I could just make out a shadow moving slowly across the room. Alex was standing there, holding a flashlight in one hand and leaning toward the floor. I couldn't see what he was doing, but he seemed fixated on a corner of the living room near the couch. He muttered something under his breath, like he was talking to someone, or something, that wasn't there. I backed away and returned to bed, trying to convince myself it was nothing. But it didn't stop. Over the next few days, I noticed other signs. My clothes would be moved in my room. My personal items occasionally disappeared for hours, only to reappear in slightly different locations. I started keeping a log and marking everything, just to see if there was a pattern. The most disturbing incident happened about a month in. I came home from work late at night, around 11:30 p.m. The apartment was dark, except for the faint glow of the living room lamp. I saw Alex sitting cross-legged on the floor, facing the corner. The lockbox from his closet was open in front of him, and I could see some papers and a few small objects spread around. He was muttering again, his voice low and urgent. I called out softly, "Alex?" He didn't respond. He didn't even look up. I stepped closer, and that's when I noticed it. Among the scattered items were photographs. They weren't just pictures from the internet. They were images of me taken in my bedroom while I was asleep. Some were close-ups of my face. Others captured me at my desk or on the couch. My stomach sank. He finally looked up, and his expression was chilling. He smiled faintly, almost satisfied, and said, "I like to keep track of things. Makes it easier to understand." I grabbed my phone, backed out of the room, and called my friend immediately. I didn't sleep in the apartment that night. I stayed at his place, making excuses to Alex that I was staying over at work or with family. A few days later, I confronted him directly. I asked why he had photographs of me and what he had been doing. He didn't deny it. Instead, he said calmly, "I'm careful. I don't hurt anyone. I just like to watch." I moved out the next day. I packed all my things in my car, changed the locks on my mailbox, and never went back. I reported him to the police with the photographs I had on my own phone. I never got a full update on whether he was arrested, but I did hear months later that his unit had been raided and the police had found dozens of personal items and cameras hidden throughout the apartment. Even now, I have trouble living with anyone. The experience left me hyper-aware of doors, locks, and the people I share space with. Every noise in a shared apartment makes me anxious. I can't shake the feeling that someone could be watching, even when I'm alone. Sometimes when I'm lying in bed late at night, I can still picture Alex sitting on that floor, whispering to the shadows, watching through cameras, cataloging lives like mine. The thought is enough to make me keep every door locked, every window shut, and my blinds drawn. I got out alive, but it was too close. Story. The end. When I first met Tyler, I didn't think much of him. I found his roommate ad online when I was scrambling to move closer to my new job in Columbus, Ohio. Rent was insane everywhere, but his offer looked reasonable. $600 for a decent-sized apartment, utilities split down the middle. The pictures showed a modest but clean two-bedroom place with hardwood floors, big windows, and even a balcony. The post said, "Looking for a respectful, quiet roommate. I work nights. Prefer someone mature." That last part, "I work nights," made me think this was perfect. I worked a standard 9 to 5 at an insurance office, so I figured we'd barely see each other. Less social interaction meant fewer chances for conflict. When I met him, he seemed exactly what the post described. Tyler was around 30, a little older than me, with short-cropped brown hair and an expression that never changed much. He wasn't unfriendly, just still. He talked quietly, moved deliberately, and didn't waste words. He told me he worked as a night security guard at a warehouse outside town. When I asked about safety, he said, "You'll be fine here. Neighbors keep to themselves." I moved in the following weekend. The first few weeks went smoothly. Tyler and I kept separate schedules, so most days it felt like I lived alone. I'd come home, cook, watch something on my laptop, and go to bed around 11. By then, he'd already left for work. When I woke up, he'd be home sleeping. We passed each other occasionally, exchanging short nods or a few words about bills or packages. He was tidy, quiet, and unobtrusive. It was ideal until I started noticing small, strange things. It began with the lights. I'd come home from work to find one or two lamps turned on that I was sure I hadn't used. Then the living room curtains. He always kept them shut during the day, but sometimes I'd find them drawn open when I got back. I figured maybe he liked some daylight before his shift, but when I asked, he said, "I don't touch those during the day. Sun messes with my sleep." I brushed it off at first, thinking maybe I was imagining things. Then, one night, I woke up around 2:30 a.m. to the sound of footsteps, slow, soft ones in the hallway just outside my room. My first thought was that Tyler had forgotten something and come back from work. But as I listened, the footsteps stopped right at my door and just stayed there. I stared at the ceiling, every muscle in my body locked. After a few seconds, the doorknob rattled gently, just a soft jiggle. Then nothing. I waited, heart pounding, until I finally heard him move away. I didn't get up to check. I didn't want to. The next morning, I mentioned it casually, trying not to sound paranoid. "Hey, were you home around 2 last night?" He didn't look up from his coffee. "No, I was at work." I laughed awkwardly. "Weird, I thought I heard someone walking around." He just shrugged. "This building creaks a lot." Maybe that was true. The place was old. I wanted to believe that was all it was. A few days later, my toothbrush was wet when I went to use it. I know how that sounds, but it wasn't like I'd left it near water. It was sitting in a cup on my sink, dry when I brushed before bed. When I picked it up that morning, it dripped. I stared at it for a long time before setting it down. The next night, I locked my bedroom door for the first time. That became a habit. About 3 weeks later, I came home early one evening. Tyler wasn't expecting me. His shift usually started at 7, and I was back by 6. His door was cracked open. I hesitated, then knocked softly and peeked inside. His room was neat, too neat. No decorations, no posters, no clutter, just a perfectly made bed, a desk, and a single small nightstand. But what stood out most were the walls. They were bare, except for several large sheets of white paper taped in rows. From where I stood, I could see each page filled with handwriting, small, dense, uniform. I shouldn't have looked, but curiosity won. I stepped closer and scanned one. It wasn't a diary. It was lists, names, dates, and addresses. Some were crossed out. I only recognized one name, mine, my full name with the date I moved in next to it. My stomach turned to ice. Before I could look any closer, I heard the front door open. Tyler's footsteps. I bolted back to my room, shut the door, and pretended to be on my computer. He didn't say anything, but I could tell he paused in the hall outside my door before continuing to his own room. That night, I didn't sleep. Over the next week, he changed. The quiet politeness was gone, replaced by something more deliberate, unnerving. He'd linger when we passed each other, his eyes following me just a second too long. Once I caught him standing in the dark kitchen when I got up for water, motionless, just staring out the window. When I greeted him, he didn't answer. The food started disappearing too. Whole meals gone from the fridge, my leftovers, snacks, milk, all missing. When I confronted him, he smiled faintly. "I don't eat your food," he said. "You probably forgot you ate it." That phrase, exactly the same as before, sounded rehearsed. That weekend, I installed a small camera in my room, just one of those $30 motion sensor models that records locally. I felt guilty, like I was invading his privacy somehow, but the unease had grown too heavy to ignore. 2 nights later, I came home and found the camera unplugged. Not just unplugged, turned to face the wall. I hadn't told anyone about it. When I checked the footage, the last clip showed my door opening slowly at 3:12 a.m. The lights were off, but the faint outline of a figure slipped inside. I could see the glow of his face in the dark, the shape of his head, his shoulders. He stood over my bed for a long minute before walking to my desk, picking up my phone and setting it back down. Then he turned, looked directly at the camera, and reached out before the feed cut off. I sat frozen for a long time, staring at the paused image of his face, expressionless, eyes wide, pupils reflecting the lens. I didn't go to bed that night. I locked myself in and stayed awake until sunrise. In the morning, I packed a small duffel bag and told my boss I was sick. I went to stay with my friend Jason across town for a few days. I didn't tell Tyler I was leaving. I texted him later, saying, Got called out of town for work. He didn't reply. The first night at Jason's, I slept like a rock. But when I woke up the next morning, there were 4 missed calls from an unknown number. Voicemail. When I played it, I heard breathing. Slow, steady. Then a voice, Tyler's, whispered, "You shouldn't have gone through my things." I froze. Jason saw my face and asked what was wrong. I handed him the phone without a word. His expression darkened. "Dude, that's messed up. You need to call the cops." I did. The officer I spoke with took it seriously at first, but without proof of a direct threat, there wasn't much they could do. They said they'd file a report and advised me not to return alone. Jason went back with me that afternoon. The apartment was exactly as I'd left it, except for one thing. My room had been stripped bare. My bed, desk, clothes, everything was gone. I stood there in shock while Jason walked around. "Where's your stuff, man?" I couldn't even answer. I just pointed to the empty space. I called Tyler. No response. His door was locked. The landlord said he hadn't seen Tyler in days. I reported it to the police again, and this time they actually entered his room. When they came back out, they told me I wouldn't be able to stay there anymore. They didn't say why, but I saw one officer pale slightly as he carried a box of papers out. Later that night, one of them called me to ask if I'd ever had issues with Tyler before. I told him everything, the lists, the camera, the phone call. He told me I'd done the right thing leaving. When I pressed for details, he said they'd found disturbing materials, including detailed notes about multiple people who'd lived with him before. Some of them were listed as missing in other states. They never found Tyler. I spent months jumping at every noise after that. I moved again, changed my number, and kept my new address private. I told myself I was safe, that he was gone. But 3 months later, a package showed up at my office with no return label. Inside was a folded sheet of paper. In the same neat handwriting from his walls, it read, "People forget what they see in the dark, but I don't." Story the end. When I moved to Indianapolis in the fall of 2017, I was desperate for a place to live that wouldn't drain the little savings I had managed to scrape together. I had just landed an entry-level job at a logistics company, which paid barely enough to cover rent, utilities, and groceries if I wanted to live alone. So I did what most people in my situation do. I started looking for a roommate. I went through all the usual channels: Craigslist, Facebook Marketplace, and a few apartment rental sites that had shared housing options. After a few weeks of striking out, I came across a listing that seemed almost too good to be true. A 2-bedroom apartment in a fairly new complex on the north side of the city, rent split right down the middle, utilities usually averaging around $100 a month. The ad had been posted by someone named Kevin. He claimed he was 27, worked full-time as a welder, and spent most of his time out of the house. The pictures looked clean, the rent was manageable, and his short bio sounded harmless enough. We exchanged a few messages back and forth. His grammar was rough, but he seemed straightforward. We agreed to meet at a coffee shop downtown to see if we'd click before signing any kind of agreement. Kevin was exactly what I expected. Tall, broad-shouldered, with greasy brown hair that looked like it hadn't seen shampoo in a couple of days. He wore a Carhartt jacket, steel-toe boots, and smelled faintly of cigarette smoke. But he was polite, even a little shy. He explained that his current roommate had moved out unexpectedly and that he couldn't afford the place on his own. He said he worked long shifts at a metal fabrication shop and wasn't home much during the day. I wasn't thrilled about moving in with a stranger, but I didn't have many options. Rent was climbing everywhere, and most of the safer neighborhoods were way out of my budget. So, after checking the apartment out in person and finding it surprisingly nice, I signed on. At first, things were fine. Kevin wasn't lying about being gone most of the day. His work schedule was brutal, 10 to 12 hours at a time, sometimes overnight. When he was home, he usually kept to himself, either watching TV in his room or tinkering with random junk he kept in the living room. But there were things that felt off. The first time I really noticed it was 2 weeks after moving in. I got home late from work, maybe around 9. Kevin wasn't there, but the TV in the living room was on. Not just on, blaring. Some old VHS movie was playing, grainy and distorted, with the audio cranked up way too high. I assumed maybe he'd left it on accidentally, so I shut it off and went to bed. The next morning, Kevin asked me casually why I turned off his movie. He wasn't angry, but his tone carried something strange in it, like I'd crossed a boundary. I told him I thought he'd left it on by accident, and he just nodded. After that, I started to notice little quirks. He had this old metal trunk in the corner of the living room. It was huge, like a military footlocker, and he never opened it when I was around. Sometimes I'd catch him sitting in front of it for hours, staring at it with the TV off, just drinking a beer. Once, when I walked into the room, he quickly tossed a blanket over it, pretending like it wasn't there. He also had this habit of eating at odd hours. I'd wake up at 3 in the morning to the sound of him clattering in the kitchen, frying bacon and eggs. He'd be sitting there shirtless, sweaty, eating while staring at nothing in particular. If I said anything, he'd act completely normal, like cooking a full meal in the middle of the night was just what people did. The first genuinely unsettling incident happened about a month in. I woke up to the sound of whispering in the living room. At first, I thought Kevin had someone over, but the voices didn't sound right. They were faint, like multiple people speaking at once, overlapping each other. I got up, opened my door quietly, and peeked out. Kevin was sitting cross-legged in front of the trunk. The TV was off, but the glow of a single lamp lit the room. He was leaning forward, whispering into the crack of the trunk's lid. His face was inches away from it, and he kept nodding like he was listening to someone respond. I didn't say anything. I went back into my room and locked the door. The next morning, Kevin acted normal. He asked if I wanted coffee, told me he was heading into work late, and made small talk about the weather. I almost convinced myself I had dreamed the whole thing, but it got worse. One night, I came home and found the trunk sitting in the hallway directly in front of my bedroom door. I couldn't even open my door without moving it. Kevin came out of his room and gave me this grin, wide and toothy, and said, "Thought maybe you'd like to see what's inside sometime." Then he dragged it back into the living room without another word. I started spending less and less time at the apartment. I stayed late at work, crashed at friends' places on the weekends, and avoided Kevin as much as possible. But even when I wasn't home, things still felt wrong. I'd return to find my bedroom door cracked open, even though I always locked it. Some of my clothes went missing, only to reappear days later, neatly folded on my bed. I tried bringing it up to him once, asking if he'd been in my room. He got quiet, stared at me for an uncomfortable amount of time, then finally said, "Sometimes things move around in this place. You just gotta get used to it." 2 months in, I was seriously considering breaking the lease, losing my deposit, and just getting out. But money was tight and moving wasn't easy. I told myself I could tough it out a little longer, that maybe he was just eccentric. Then came the night that finally broke me. I woke up around 2 a.m. to the sound of heavy dragging. It was coming from the living room. I lay in bed, frozen, listening as something scraped slowly across the floor. Then I heard Kevin's voice, low and strained, muttering words I couldn't make out. Against my better judgment, I got up and cracked my door open. The trunk was open. I couldn't see much from where I was, but I saw Kevin bent over it, his arms straining as he tried to lift something out. Something that wasn't small. For a moment, I thought I saw a hand, a pale, limp hand, hanging from the side of the trunk before he shoved whatever it was back inside and slammed the lid shut. The sound it made when it closed was like a coffin lid. Kevin turned suddenly, and even though the hallway was dark, I knew he saw me. He didn't say a word, just stared. His eyes were wide, his chest heaving. Then, without breaking eye contact, he slowly dragged the trunk back into the corner of the living room, sat on it, and stayed there until morning. I didn't sleep the rest of the night. At first light, I packed a bag, grabbed whatever essentials I could, and left. I never went back. I called the landlord later, told him I was terminating the lease, and forfeited my deposit. For weeks afterward, I couldn't shake the image of that pale hand, the way Kevin whispered into the trunk like it whispered back. I never found out what was inside, and I never wanted to. But sometimes, late at night, when I'm lying in bed, I swear I can still hear that dragging sound across the floor. Story the end. When I first met Connor, he seemed like the kind of roommate anyone would be glad to have. We both moved into a 3-bedroom rental house near the edge of town, And the landlord paired us together because we were both young, single, and looking for a place cheap enough to afford without being forced into one of those noisy college-style apartments. I was 24, working as a junior project manager for a construction company, and he was about my age, working at a warehouse distribution center on the night shift. The third bedroom was supposed to be filled by another tenant, but after the first guy backed out, it ended up just being the two of us splitting the rent. That worked fine with me. At first, things were easy. Connor was quiet, polite, and he paid his half of the rent on time. He didn't party, didn't bring people over, and mostly kept to himself. Our schedules didn't overlap much since I worked days and he worked nights. So often we'd just leave notes for each other about groceries or chores. I liked that arrangement. I wasn't looking for a new best friend, just someone stable to split costs with. But after about a month, I started noticing strange little things that made me uneasy. For example, when I got home from work, sometimes I'd find my bedroom door slightly open. I kept it shut every morning before leaving, and I knew it wasn't from a draft since the doors in that house stuck from the humidity. One night, I came home earlier than usual and caught Connor walking out of my room. He froze when he saw me, holding a blank expression like he hadn't expected me to show up. "Oh, sorry," he said quickly. "I thought this was the bathroom. Got turned around." That excuse didn't make much sense. The bathroom was on the other side of the hallway, and he'd already been living there for weeks. But I didn't push it. I just gave a tight smile and said, "Yeah, no worries." Inside, though, I felt uneasy. After that, I started locking my bedroom door whenever I left. A couple days later, I noticed scratch marks around the knob, like someone had tried to tamper with it. They weren't big, just faint scuffs, but enough to make me pay attention. I told myself I might have done it fumbling with my keys, but a gut feeling told me otherwise. Connor's behavior began to shift too. He went from being quiet and polite to asking odd, invasive questions whenever we crossed paths in the kitchen or living room. He'd ask things like, "So, do you sleep heavy?" Or, "What's the weirdest dream you've ever had?" Once he asked, "Do you ever feel like someone's watching you at night?" He said it with such casual interest that it sent a chill through me. I laughed it off and said, "Not really," then quickly found a reason to leave the room. Another night, I woke up around 3 a.m. to what sounded like footsteps outside my door. They were slow, deliberate, like someone was standing there just shifting their weight back and forth. I held my breath, listening. After about a minute, the footsteps faded. When I cracked open the door, the hallway was empty. I started losing sleep, paranoid about what Connor might be doing. To cope, I bought one of those cheap motion sensor cameras and set it up facing my bedroom door from the inside. The first 2 nights, it caught nothing. But on the third night, when I reviewed the footage before work, my stomach dropped. Around 3:22 a.m., the doorknob rattled. The lock held, but the knob shook for nearly 30 seconds before stopping. Then, on the edge of the frame, I saw Connor's face. He leaned close to the door, pressing his ear against it, listening. Then he walked away. I confronted him the next evening. "Hey, man," I said carefully, trying to sound casual. "Were you messing with my door last night?" His expression didn't change. He just looked at me blankly for a long moment, then smiled faintly. "Must have been dreaming, dude. You sure you weren't sleepwalking or something?" "No," I said firmly. "I'm not sleepwalking. Just don't mess with my room, all right?" He chuckled softly. Sure, no problem." But the way he said it didn't feel like reassurance. It felt like mockery. From then on, the atmosphere in the house grew oppressive. I never saw him eat, yet the fridge would be empty of random items I'd bought. I'd wake up to the sound of the shower running at strange hours, even though Connor supposedly showered at work. Sometimes, I'd find muddy footprints in the hallway leading toward my room, even though I always left my shoes by the door. One Friday night, I decided I'd had enough. I was going to move out. I texted the landlord explaining I'd cover the next month's rent while I found another place, but that I didn't feel safe living there anymore. I didn't go into detail, just enough to let him know I wasn't staying. That night, I locked my bedroom door, wedged a chair under the knob, and tried to sleep. Around 2 a.m., I woke up to the sound of scratching. Not on the door this time, but on the wall. It was faint at first, then more insistent, like fingernails dragging against the plaster. The sound came from the shared wall between my room and Connor's. I sat there in the dark, heart pounding, listening. The scratching continued for what felt like forever. Finally, I shouted, "Knock it off, Connor!" The noise stopped instantly. Silence filled the house. Then, after a long pause, he whispered through the wall, "I like knowing you're awake." I barely slept at all that night. The next morning, I started packing. I didn't care if I had to leave furniture behind. I just wanted out. But when I stepped into the living room, I froze. On the coffee table sat one of my t-shirts, neatly folded. I hadn't left it there. And on top of it, placed carefully, was a pair of scissors. I turned slowly toward the hallway. Connor's door was wide open. Inside, his room was nearly empty. No clothes, no personal belongings, just a bare mattress on the floor and, taped to the wall above it, a series of Polaroid photos. My photos. Pictures of me sleeping, taken from inside my room. I staggered back, bile rising in my throat. The realization hit me all at once. He'd been coming into my room for weeks, maybe longer, watching me. I didn't waste another second. I grabbed my keys, bolted to my car, and didn't stop driving until I reached a friend's place across town. I called the landlord the next day and told him everything. He sounded disturbed but not shocked. He said Connor had been a last-minute tenant with little background info, and now he couldn't get a hold of him at all. When the landlord checked the house later, he said it looked like Connor had vanished completely, leaving no trace. I never went back for the rest of my things. Losing a couple $100 worth of furniture was nothing compared to the dread that filled me every time I thought about those Polaroids. I still wonder how many nights he stood there watching me in the dark, waiting for me to wake up. And worst of all, I don't know where he went, or if he's still out there looking for another roommate. Story the end. When I first met Brandon, he seemed like the perfect roommate. I had just moved to Columbus, Ohio for a new job and was looking for a place that wouldn't completely drain my paycheck. The apartment complex I found wasn't anything special, but the rent was cheap and the location was convenient. I had been nervous about finding a roommate through an online ad, but when Brandon responded, he seemed normal enough. He was around my age, mid-20s, worked at a warehouse, and liked sports and video games. He was polite during our first meeting, offered me a beer, and didn't seem like the type who would throw wild parties or skip out on rent. At the time, I thought I got lucky. The first couple weeks were fine. We got along well enough, watched some football games together, split groceries, and kept things relatively clean. He worked nights sometimes, so I'd have the place to myself after work, which I actually liked. I didn't really notice anything unusual at first, just little quirks. He would leave his bedroom door locked at all times, even if he was just going to the kitchen or the bathroom. He also didn't like me using his bathroom supplies. I remember once I borrowed his toothpaste because I ran out, and the next day he confronted me at saying he could tell because the cap had been twisted differently. I thought it was a little obsessive, but not something worth making an issue about. But over time, the quirks turned into something darker. One night, I woke up around 2 a.m. to the sound of the front door opening. Brandon wasn't supposed to be home since he was scheduled for the night shift. I figured maybe he got off early, but when I peeked out of my bedroom, I didn't see him. The door was shut, the apartment was dark, and there was no movement. I checked the lock, and it was secure. It unsettled me, but I convinced myself I imagined it and went back to bed. A week later, it happened again. This time, I clearly heard the door creak and footsteps on the carpet. I called out his name, but there was no answer. When I checked, his bedroom door was shut and locked, the way it always was when he was gone. I stood there for a long time staring at the door, feeling like someone else was inside with me. Eventually, I went back to bed, but I didn't sleep much that night. Things started to escalate after that. I began noticing items in my room weren't where I had left them. A shirt folded differently, my phone charger unplugged, a drawer slightly open. At first, I thought maybe I was being careless, but the feeling grew stronger each day that someone had been in my room when I wasn't there. The worst part came one evening when I got home early. Brandon was sitting in the living room, but when I walked into my bedroom, I saw my closet door slightly ajar. Inside, there was one of my t-shirts hanging on the rod, but it had been turned inside out. I hadn't done that. I confronted him about it, but he laughed it off, saying maybe I was just tired and forgetting things. His calm dismissal made me question myself for a moment, but the unease stayed with me. Around that time, I also started noticing Brandon watching me in strange ways. Sometimes I'd catch him staring at me while I was cooking or working on my laptop. Not a casual glance, but an intense, unblinking stare. When I looked at him, he wouldn't smile or say anything, just keep watching until I said something to break the silence. I began spending more time in my room with the door locked. The apartment itself started feeling heavier too, like the walls were pressing in. I started having nightmares. Ones where I'd wake up to find Brandon standing over my bed, just watching. Sometimes I'd dream of the front door opening in the middle of the night, only to wake up and hear the sound for real. One night, I woke to a sound that froze me in place. The subtle click of my bedroom doorknob turning. I had locked it. I was sure of that. My heart hammered as I sat up, staring at the knob. After a few seconds, the turning stopped, and I heard footsteps retreat down the hall. I didn't sleep the rest of the night. The next morning, I confronted him. I asked if he had tried to come into my room during the night. He denied it immediately, but his tone was sharp, defensive, almost angry that I'd even suggest it. He said maybe I dreamed it, or maybe the lock was faulty. Then he looked me dead in the eye and said, "You shouldn't be locking your door anyway. That's not how roommates should live." That sentence rattled me. From then on, I knew I had to get out. But the lease still had months left, and I couldn't afford to move without losing a lot of money. So I started staying at friends' places whenever I could, but eventually I'd have to come back. And each time I did, things got worse. I started finding my bedroom window unlocked, even though I kept it latched. Once, I found muddy shoe prints on my carpet, leading from the window to my closet. When I confronted Brandon, he laughed again, but there was no warmth in it. It was cold, mocking. One weekend, I decided to install a small security camera in my room while I was out. I didn't tell him about it. When I checked the footage later that night, my blood ran cold. Brandon had come into my room. He used a key to unlock the door while I was gone. He didn't steal anything, but he walked around, touched my clothes, looked through my drawers, and even sat on my bed for several minutes just staring at the wall. Then he got up, carefully locked the door behind him, and left like nothing happened. I didn't sleep at all that night. I knew I had evidence, but I didn't know what to do. I was scared that if I confronted him with proof, it would push him into doing something worse. I started planning to move out, no matter the cost. Before I could, though, something happened that still haunts me. One night, I woke up to the feeling of someone in my room. My eyes adjusted to the dark, and there he was, Brandon, standing in the corner near my closet, just watching me. My door was locked. I know it was. Yet he was inside. I couldn't move. My body was frozen in terror. For what felt like hours, he just stood there, staring, not making a sound. Finally, I managed to whisper his name. He didn't answer. He just turned and walked out, shutting the door behind him. I didn't sleep again until I left that apartment for good. I packed my stuff the next day while he was at work and moved in with a coworker temporarily. I never went back, and I never saw Brandon again. Sometimes I still wonder what his endgame was, why he was so obsessed with entering my space, with watching me. The memory of waking up and seeing him in my room still keeps me awake at night. I don't know how he got in that night, or how long he had been standing there before I woke up. I just know that if I hadn't left when I did, something far worse might have happened. Story the end. It started with Craigslist. I had just moved to Portland for a new job, and the apartment market was brutal. After weeks of expensive showings and dead-end applications, I finally found a listing for a room in a shared apartment on the east side. The ad was simple: room for rent in two-bedroom apartment, $650 a month, utilities included, quiet, clean, responsible roommate preferred. The photos showed a tidy living space, nothing fancy, but it looked safe. I emailed the poster, a guy named Jeremy, and set up a meeting for that evening. When I arrived, the building was older, kind of run down, but the hallway smelled clean, like someone had recently scrubbed it. Jeremy opened the door with a big smile, tall, skinny, in his mid-20s. He had this nervous energy about him, like he was trying too hard to be welcoming. The apartment was small but decent. The living room had a couch, a TV, some shelves with books, and a few boxes stacked in the corner. He offered me a beer, and we sat down to chat. Everything seemed normal enough. He explained the rent, the lease, and asked me some basic questions about myself. I felt fine about it, so I said I'd take the room. The first week went smoothly. Jeremy was friendly enough, though a little socially awkward. He left notes around the kitchen about cleaning schedules and bills, which was annoying but manageable. The apartment felt like a normal shared space. Then the little odd things started. The first night, I noticed noises. At first, I thought it was just the building settling, the usual creaks and groans, but some of the sounds were different, like footsteps, but heavy, slow, deliberate, pacing back and forth across the living room. I figured Jeremy was home and just moving around late, but when I checked, he was asleep in his room. I shrugged it off. Portland old buildings are weird. Then I noticed things missing. My cereal box, a bag of chips, stuff I was sure I'd left in the kitchen. At first, I blamed myself, thinking I'd been forgetful. But it kept happening. One morning, I came home from work and my backpack was moved from the corner where I left it. Not like nudged an inch, completely shifted to the middle of the living room. My laptop bag had been unzipped. I chalked it up to Jeremy borrowing things without asking, but when I brought it up, he acted confused. "I haven't touched that," he said, looking genuinely puzzled. Then the smells started. It was subtle at first, like something damp, slightly metallic, but it would vanish when I checked. My room sometimes smelled like old smoke, even though neither of us smoked. I thought maybe the building had mold, but I didn't find anything. One night, I woke up to a loud crash. My bedroom door was slightly open. I always left it closed, and there was a shadow moving in the living room. Heart hammering, I grabbed my phone to call Jeremy, but he was snoring loudly in his room. I flicked on the light. Nothing. Just the couch knocked over slightly, like someone had leaned on it or tried to sit. I told myself it was the wind or my imagination. Things escalated after about 2 weeks. I started coming home to find my food rearranged, sometimes cut open. I thought maybe a rat or something, but the cuts were too precise, like a knife had been used. Once I found a note tucked under my pillow. It just said, "You're awake now." No signature. I freaked out and called my friend Sam, who told me to get a security camera. I bought a cheap one and set it up in the living room. That night, I slept in my room with the camera recording. Around 3 a.m., I heard it again, the heavy pacing, the scraping sounds. I sat up, heart racing. I waited until morning to review the footage. On the video, I saw it. A figure, maybe 6 feet tall, moving around the living room. It wasn't Jeremy. He was asleep in his bed. The figure was thin, hunched over slightly, wearing a hooded sweatshirt, and it moved like it didn't want to be noticed but couldn't help itself. It rifled through the kitchen, opened cabinets, and finally paused to stare directly at the camera. Its face was obscured, but I could feel it staring at me through the lens. Then it disappeared through the wall. I watched that last part over and over, thinking I was seeing things. There's no way someone could have just walked through the wall. I was terrified, but I didn't know what to do. Calling the police seemed extreme. They'd think I was hallucinating. I didn't tell Jeremy. I wasn't sure I could. That week, I started noticing more things. My laptop would be on with documents open that I hadn't touched. My phone would be moved across the room. I started leaving small objects on my desk to see if they would be moved, and they always were. One night, I stayed up, trying to catch it in the act. Around 2:30 a.m., I heard it again. The scraping, pacing. I turned on the hallway light. At first, nothing. Then, out of the corner of my eye, I saw it standing at the end of the hall, just staring at me. Not moving, not breathing, just standing. I couldn't see a face, just a dark blur. I froze. My heart was pounding. I tried to speak, but my voice caught in my throat. It didn't move for maybe a minute, then it slowly backed away into Jeremy's room, and the door slammed shut. I spent the night in my car. When I came back in the morning, Jeremy was in the kitchen, acting normal, making coffee. I didn't say anything. Then came the physical interactions. I started waking up with scratches on my arms, bruises that weren't there before. Once my door was locked from the inside and I found my closet door open, clothes tossed everywhere. Something had been in my room. Something that wasn't Jeremy. I tried leaving. I looked for another apartment, but my lease was a year long. Breaking it would cost a fortune. I told myself I just had to endure it, document everything, and maybe I could get someone else to investigate. One night, I had a breakthrough, or a breakdown. I was in the kitchen, lights on, phone recording, trying to catch it. Around midnight, I heard it again, the footsteps, heavy, slow. This time, I followed the sound, creeping down the hallway. The living room was empty, but there was a smell, like burnt hair, metallic, sharp. I froze. And then I saw it, on the couch. It was crouched, almost animalistic, shaking slightly. It had long, stringy hair and pale skin stretched too tight over its skull. Its fingers were long, bony, gripping the couch. And its eyes, oh God, its eyes were completely black. It looked at me, and I could feel it piercing through me like it was reading my mind. I stumbled back, tripped over my own feet, and it disappeared. Just like that. I never told Jeremy. I couldn't. I didn't know what he would say. I couldn't stay in the apartment anymore, though. I packed what I could, left a note saying I was moving out, and never looked back. Months later, I checked online. The apartment had been listed again, same room, same photos, same low rent. The new roommate left reviews. Roommate was fine, but weird things happened at night. I didn't stay long. They didn't go into detail, but it was the same pattern. I never found out what it was. I never saw it again. But I sometimes think about those black eyes, the feeling of it staring into me, knowing me. And I know it's still out there, waiting for the next person to move into that apartment. I've moved to a different city since then. I'm careful about roommates. I don't leave my doors unlocked, and I sleep with lights on. But sometimes in the middle of the night, I think I hear those heavy footsteps, and I remember the smell of burnt hair, the coldness, the silence before it appeared. I've learned to trust my instincts now. Don't ignore the small things. Don't ignore the noises, the missing items, the strange smells. Something was in that apartment with me, something that shouldn't have been. And even now, years later, I can't shake the feeling that it's still watching, waiting, and that one day it will follow me again. The worst part is knowing that Jeremy never seemed to notice. Or maybe he did, and that's why he was always so nervous. I still wonder if he knew more than he let on, if he'd seen it before, if he knew how to keep it at bay, or if he was just as terrified as I was and didn't want to admit it. I tell this story to friends carefully. Most don't believe me. They say it sounds like paranoia, stress from a new city, overactive imagination. But I know what I saw. I know what I felt. And I know the scratches on my arms weren't self-inflicted. I still get chills thinking about the note under my pillow. You're awake now. What did that mean? That I had been sleeping while it watched me? That it had been living in the apartment all along, invisible, waiting for me? I'll never know. Since then, I've become obsessive about locks, security cameras, and checking every corner of a room before sleeping. I've even stayed at hotels with 24-hour staff, just so I can't be alone with whatever it was. I've also researched the building. It was built in the 1930s, and there were rumors of a tenant who disappeared mysteriously in the 1950s. They say the police never found a body. Some tenants report strange occurrences, voices, shadows, objects moving on their own. Everyone calls it haunted, but I know it's more than a haunting. It felt alive. Sometimes when I'm driving alone at night, I see shapes in the darkness, figures with black eyes standing at the edge of the road, staring. I tell myself it's just shadows, but a part of me knows better. I've considered therapy, but I don't think anyone could understand. It's not just fear. It's the certainty that something is out there, patient, watching, learning, and knowing that if I ever step into the wrong apartment, I might see it again. I might feel it again. I might be trapped in that room with it. I don't know if I'll ever truly feel safe again. And I think that's the point. That apartment, that building, that thing, it changed me. And I can't go back to being naive about the world. There's something out there that doesn't belong, that preys on the ordinary, and I was unlucky enough to cross paths with it. Now, when I rent places or interview potential roommates, I always check for the little things, hidden corners, odd smells, unexplained noises. I ask questions about the history of the building, the previous tenants, anything unusual. People think I'm paranoid, but I don't care. I've seen what's possible. I've felt what it's like to be watched by something that shouldn't exist, and I will never ignore the signs again. I still think about that night. The figure on the couch, its black eyes drilling into mine. The memory wakes me up sometimes, even years later, cold and shaking, drenched in sweat. I can still feel its presence, the way it moved, the way it vanished into the walls. I will never forget it, and I will never be able to explain it. I've moved on in life, found new apartments, new jobs, even new friends, but there's a part of me that's always on edge, always alert, always wondering if the next apartment, the next roommate, might be the place it finds me again. And somewhere out there, I know it waits, watching, patient, waiting for the next person to make the mistake of thinking it's safe to live alone or with someone oblivious in the wrong apartment at the wrong time. Story the end. I moved into my first apartment in Chicago right after college. It was a small, two-bedroom place on the third floor of a brick building in Logan Square. I had been looking for a roommate for weeks because the rent alone was more than I could handle on my own. I put up an ad online, something simple, looking for a responsible, quiet roommate. 2BR apartment, $950 a month, utilities included, move-in ready. I got a few responses, but one stuck out. His name was Jason. He replied immediately, polite, seemed employed, and even offered to come meet me that afternoon. When he showed up, Jason was tall, thin, and had this calm, almost eerie demeanor. He smiled a little too perfectly, I thought at the time, but he was articulate and polite. He seemed clean, carried himself like he took care of himself, and said he liked a quiet environment, which was exactly what I wanted. I didn't feel any red flags in that first meeting. We signed the lease together, Feather split the deposit, and I thought everything was settled. The first few weeks were normal. Jason kept to himself, working long hours at some office job he claimed to enjoy. He didn't drink, didn't have friends over, and seemed content just to sit in his room, reading or playing music quietly. I enjoyed the peace at first. He was tidy, always washing dishes after meals, and never touched my things without asking. Everything seemed ideal. Then, around the third week, I started noticing small things. At first, it was subtle. My cereal box would be slightly moved in the cupboard, or a clean towel would be draped over a chair in my room when I was sure I hadn't left it there. I chalked it up to forgetfulness. Maybe I'd put things down absent-mindedly, but the feeling that someone had been in my room lingered. A month in, things escalated. I came home one night from work, around midnight, and my apartment door was unlocked. I was certain I had locked it. My heart pounded as I pushed it open, but the apartment seemed normal. Jason's bedroom door was closed, and I thought maybe I had just forgotten. But then I noticed my laptop on the couch, open, on a blank Word document as if someone had been typing and deleted everything. "Jason?" I called, trying to sound casual. No response. I checked his room. The door was shut. I began to feel an uneasy tension in my chest, like I was being watched. I sat down, trying to rationalize, telling myself I was overreacting. It wasn't long after that I started waking up to strange noises at night. At first, it was small things, a floorboard creaking in the hallway, faint thumps from Jason's room. Then, more unsettling sounds, whispers, the scrape of furniture, doors opening and closing. One night, I woke up to see the silhouette of a man standing in the hallway outside my bedroom, just standing there, motionless. My room was dark, the hallway dimly lit by streetlights. My stomach froze. I blinked and he was gone. I tried talking to Jason about it. "Hey, did you hear anything last night?" I asked casually one morning over coffee. "No," he said, looking at me with a blank expression. "Why?" "I thought I heard something, maybe a noise or something. I don't know." He nodded once and went back to his cereal. Nothing more. No concern, no denial, just blankness. Then my things started disappearing, not in big ways, but small items. Jewelry, headphones, a few dollars here and there. I started locking my bedroom door, though Jason had a key. He never seemed bothered by my precautions. The most unsettling part was how he watched me. Sometimes I would catch him standing in the hallway, just staring, unmoving, his eyes fixed on me, not saying a word. He did this for maybe a few seconds, sometimes minutes. Whenever I made eye contact, he would smile faintly, almost as if he was amused. I never knew what to say or do. I remember one night around Halloween, I came home late after meeting friends downtown. The apartment was dark, silent. I flicked the light switch in the living room and froze. Jason was sitting in the corner of the room, knees to his chest, staring at me. "You're late," he said calmly. His voice was low, steady. I I was with friends, I replied, trying to mask my unease. You shouldn't be out alone at night, he said. People can get hurt. I felt a chill run down my spine. It wasn't advice. It was a statement, like he was predicting something, warning me. I ignored it, made my way to my bedroom, locked the door, and tried to sleep. That night, I heard scratching at my door. First soft, then louder. Someone pressing their hand against the wood, or something dragging along the floor. I stayed still, holding my breath. After a few minutes, it stopped. I didn't sleep at all that night. Days later, I confronted him. Jason, this has to stop. I keep hearing things and my stuff is disappearing. Did you go through my room? He looked at me calmly. You shouldn't be so careless. You leave things out. People notice. You need to be careful about your possessions. Don't act like this is my fault. Someone's in my room. You don't do this to someone you live with. He shrugged, expression unchanged. I'm not going to hurt you. You're safe here. But you have to be careful. People take advantage. I didn't know what to say. His calmness was terrifying, like he was in control of something I couldn't see. I tried to stay away, spending more time at work, at friends' apartments, anything to avoid being alone. But Jason's behavior worsened. He started leaving his bedroom door open, always sitting in the living room staring at me. I caught him multiple times trying to look through my window at night, sometimes with a flashlight. I never confronted him about it anymore. I just avoided his gaze. One evening, I came home to find my apartment rearranged. My furniture moved slightly, my bedsheet pulled off and folded neatly at the end of the bed, my closet doors open with clothes scattered. I felt completely violated. Jason was in his room, headphones on, pretending nothing was happening. I packed a small overnight bag and went to a friend's house, not even trying to explain why. The next day, I called the landlord. I need to move out, I said, trying to keep my voice steady. There's a problem with my roommate. Problem with your roommate? The landlord asked. What kind of problem? Behavioral, he's unsafe, I said, not wanting to get into details. I can't live here anymore. The landlord hesitated, then said, I'll make arrangements. Just give me a week's notice. I spent that week mostly friends' places, only going home to grab essentials. Jason noticed, of course, and started following me around the apartment. Lingering at doors, standing in corners, it was impossible to feel safe. I moved out finally, taking a new studio across town. I didn't look back. I tried to convince myself it was over, that I'd escaped, but then a week later I saw the news. They'd arrested a man in Logan Square, Jason Parker. He'd been accused of kidnapping a woman, holding her in a makeshift cell in his apartment. The details were horrifying. She'd been missing for weeks. No one knew. My stomach sank. Every unsettling moment, every time he'd stood watching me, every violation of my privacy, it all made sense. I realized then that every small thing I had noticed, the noises, the rearranged furniture, the disappearing items, his eerie calmness, was a warning. I could have been next. The thought still haunts me. I still check locks multiple times, even in my new apartment. I can't shake the memory of his eyes, that calm, unblinking stare, and the way he knew exactly how to unsettle someone without ever lifting a hand. Story the end. It started off like any ordinary college move-in. I was a sophomore at a mid-sized university in Ohio, moving into an off-campus apartment that my roommate, Tyler, and I had found through the school's housing board. We had met briefly over Zoom a few weeks before and had exchanged a few texts. He seemed normal, quiet, studious, a little awkward, but nothing that set off alarms. I was relieved. After my freshman year, I just wanted a low-drama living situation. The first week was uneventful. Tyler kept to his room mostly, and I kept to mine. We'd occasionally run into each other in the kitchen or the living room, make small talk, and then retreat. He was polite enough, always saying hi and bye, and sometimes he'd ask if I needed anything, but there was a subtle offness, not anything I could pin down. I chalked it up to him being shy. Then the noises started. I remember it vividly because I was lying on my bed late one night, scrolling through my phone when I heard a faint tapping. At first, I thought it was construction from the building next door, or maybe the heating system, but the sound was very deliberate, tap, 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 like someone knocking in a rhythm. I ignored it, convincing myself it was nothing. A few nights later, the tapping turned into shuffling, soft footsteps in the living room, though I was alone. I texted Tyler, asking if he was in the kitchen. and he replied almost immediately that he was in his room. I started keeping a journal of the strange noises, thinking I was overreacting. 2 weeks in, things escalated. I came home from a late-night study session to find my living room completely rearranged. Not a little messy, but every chair and table slightly shifted, and my laptop, which I had left on the coffee table, was now on the floor, screen cracked. My first thought was Tyler. I knocked on his door, and he opened it slowly, a sleepy, confused look on his face. "What happened?" he asked. I wanted to believe him, so I let it slide and said, "I probably just forgot how I left it." But my gut told me otherwise. After that incident, I became hyper-aware. I installed a cheap motion sensor camera in the living room, mostly to ease my own paranoia. That night, I stayed up watching the feed. Around 2:30 a.m., I saw him, or someone, walk across the room. They paused by the couch, crouched down, and just stared for a few seconds. I could see the outline clearly. It was Tyler, but he wasn't moving normally, more like gliding, almost silent. I texted him in the morning asking if he had been awake, and he replied, "I was asleep all night. Why?" That night, I barely slept. Things got worse over the next month. My belongings started disappearing. At first, it was small things, chargers, books, a pair of headphones, but then it escalated. My laptop vanished for 2 days. When I found it under my bed, the battery was dead, and the screen had strange streaks across it, almost like someone had tried to scratch it with a sharp object. Food began disappearing too. Not just mine, but groceries I bought for both of us. When I confronted Tyler, he laughed nervously, saying he had no idea. I wanted to believe him, but the evidence stacked up. One night, I came home late from a library session. The apartment was dark, except for the faint glow from the kitchen. I walked in and my stomach dropped. Tyler was sitting at the dining table, completely still, staring at the wall. I froze. "Tyler?" I whispered. He didn't respond. I stepped closer, and that's when I noticed the wall. He had drawn something. Not a normal drawing, but a series of numbers and symbols, like some kind of code, all in black marker. I asked him what it was. He didn't answer, just kept staring. I left the apartment that night, sleeping in my car because I couldn't bring myself to stay. The next morning, I called my best friend, Mara. She came over while I was at class. When I returned, she looked shaken. "What is this?" she asked, pointing to more symbols, now covering the walls in the living room and hallway. I couldn't answer her. Tyler's door was open, and the room was dark, the blinds drawn. I peeked inside. He was gone. All his belongings were gone too. No note, no explanation. Just gone. I tried to move past it. I reported him to the apartment management, filed a missing person report, and told the campus police what had been happening. They were polite but skeptical. There were no witnesses, no direct evidence linking Tyler to any crime. The only thing I had was the security footage, which showed him wandering the apartment at night. But even that could have been someone else. Then the emails started. At first, they were harmless. A subject line with my name, no content. Then the tone changed. Lines of text appeared that I didn't understand, strings of numbers and symbols like the ones he had drawn on the walls. Some of them seemed random, but occasionally phrases emerged, threatening and personal. "I see you when you sleep. Don't trust anyone. Your things aren't safe." I blocked the email accounts as quickly as they appeared, but each time I thought I was safe, a new one would show up from an untraceable address. I changed my locks. I installed new security cameras, added deadbolts, everything I could think of. Still, at night, I could hear the tapping, the shuffling. Once I woke up to the sound of breathing, heavy, deliberate, coming from the closet in my bedroom. I froze. I didn't move for what felt like hours. Eventually, I convinced myself it was a dream. I told friends, but no one really understood. They thought I was stressed, maybe anxious from school. It wasn't until 3 months later that the true horror began. I was walking back from class late in the evening when I noticed a man standing across the street, leaning against a lamppost, watching me. He was tall, broad, but his face, I can't describe it exactly because it wasn't fully visible, like it was always in shadow. My skin crawled. I crossed the street. He crossed with me. I started jogging. He jogged with me. Every turn I made, every street I entered, he followed. My phone was in my hand, ready to call 911, but when I tried, the battery died instantly. No signal. It was like he had anticipated it. I finally lost him near a convenience store, ducking inside and waiting for hours until I felt safe. I called the police. They came, took a report, but of course, when they looked around outside, there was no one. No prints, no evidence. Just me, shaking and terrified. I moved out of the apartment the following weekend. I tried to cut off all contact, change my number, everything. But a few weeks later, I got a package. No return address. Inside was a single photo, me taken from outside my new apartment through my window. I immediately called the police. They were incredulous. I filed another report, but again, nothing came of it. It's been 2 years since that apartment, but the fear never went away. Sometimes when I'm alone, I hear the tapping. Not always the same pattern, but enough to make my heart race. I've moved 4 times since then, each time thinking it was over, and each time I get a strange feeling, like I'm being watched. Friends have noticed me jump at shadows, flinch at every noise. I know Tyler is out there somewhere. I don't know where, I don't know why, and I don't know if he's following me or if he ever stopped. Sometimes I wonder if the person who haunted me for those months is even him, or if it was something else that used his face as a mask. I'll never forget the sight of him, crouched by the couch, staring at nothing but somehow seeing everything, and that wall covered in symbols that seemed alive, as if they were whispering. I've tried therapy, medication, all the usual things, but nothing can erase the memory of living with someone who was supposed to be normal. Someone who smiled and said hello, but hid something primal beneath that thin layer of civility. The paranoia, the sleepless nights, the feeling of being hunted, it doesn't leave you. And even now, years later, I check my locks twice. Every night. I check the perimeter. I look out my windows. I never stop. And sometimes when the night is quiet and I'm alone in my apartment, I hear it. The soft, deliberate tapping coming from just beyond the wall. Story the end. It was late August when I first moved into the apartment on the edge of downtown Chicago. I was fresh out of college, trying to get my footing in the city with a job at a marketing firm and very little money to spare. The rent for the place was shockingly cheap, which was a relief, but I immediately felt a slight chill when I walked through the door. The building itself was an old brick structure, a little rundown, with creaky floors and a faint smell of damp wood. My roommate, or rather the person I would be sharing the 2-bedroom apartment with, was someone I had met online through a roommate finding site. He seemed normal enough in his messages. Mid-20s, worked nights as a security guard, quiet, kept to himself. That was exactly what I wanted. His name was Derek. When I met him in person, he was polite, a little awkward, and his eyes had a strange intensity that I didn't notice at first. He shook my hand firmly, and I had the fleeting thought that he might be more anxious than he let on. I chalked it up to first impressions and tried to focus on unpacking my things. The first couple of days were fine. Derek mostly kept to himself, leaving the apartment at odd hours and coming back late at night. I was adjusting to my new job and the city life, so I didn't pay much attention. But then little things started happening that made me uneasy. At first, it was small. I'd noticed my cereal box slightly moved from where I left it, or my backpack slightly unzipped. I didn't think much of it. Maybe I was forgetful, maybe I was just tired, but the feeling of being watched began to creep in. One night, I was working late at my computer, headphones on, when I heard the sound of someone breathing heavily behind me. I whipped around, heart pounding, but Derek wasn't there. The bedroom door was closed, and there was no one else in the apartment. I tried to brush it off as paranoia, but the sense of being observed didn't leave me. A week later, I came home from work to find the apartment dark, lights off. I called out for Derek, but there was no response. As I set down my bag in the living room, I noticed that my laptop was open, even though I had shut it down before leaving. My stomach sank. I walked over to it, but there was nothing unusual on the screen. Still, the thought that someone had been in my personal space made my skin crawl. I decided to confront Derek the next day. I asked him if he had been in my room, and he looked genuinely confused, shaking his head. "Why would I do that?" he said, his voice calm. I wanted to believe him, but the unease lingered. I started double-checking locks, hiding my valuables, and making sure my bedroom door was always closed. Then things escalated. I began hearing noises at night, footsteps pacing outside my room, the sound of drawers opening and closing. One night, I woke up to the sound of my bedroom door creaking open. I froze, my heart hammering in my chest. A shadowy figure stood in the doorway, barely visible in the moonlight streaming through the blinds. My voice caught in my throat. "Who's there?" I managed to whisper. The figure didn't move. After what felt like an eternity, it disappeared, and my door swung shut on its own. I couldn't sleep that night. I spent hours listening, straining to hear any sound, my body tense. The next morning, I told myself it was a dream, a nightmare caused by stress, but deep down I knew it wasn't. Over the next month, the incidents became more frequent and more disturbing. Items in my room would be moved, sometimes rearranged in ways that made no sense. My clothes would be folded neatly, or my shoes placed in pairs by the door, things I had never done myself. I began finding notes tucked under my pillow, written in a scrawled handwriting I didn't recognize. They weren't threatening, exactly, but they were unsettling. One simply read, "I'm watching." Another, "You're not alone." I started documenting everything, taking photos, writing down times and dates. Derek always seemed oblivious, his behavior unchanged. I considered moving out, but I was tied into a lease and couldn't afford to break it without serious financial consequences. One night I was working late again when I heard the faint sound of music coming from the living room. It was an old tune, something classical, something that seemed out of place. I went to check, and the room was empty. The music stopped as soon as I entered. I noticed a faint outline of something on the couch. A blanket moved slightly, as if someone had been sitting there. My phone buzzed in my pocket, and I checked it. A message from an unknown number. "You're getting too comfortable." Panic surged through me. I called Derek, but he didn't answer. I left a voicemail, demanding he call me back. When he returned home hours later, he acted like nothing had happened. I couldn't tell him about the messages. I didn't want to sound insane. But my fear of him started to grow. There were moments when I caught him staring at me, a strange, unreadable look in his eyes. I decided to install a small security camera in my room. I didn't tell Derek. The footage revealed things I couldn't explain. At 2:13 a.m., the camera captured a shadow moving across my room. I froze when I saw it. The figure was wearing a hoodie, face obscured, but the way it moved was deliberate, almost casual, like it belonged there. It paused by my bed, then disappeared from view. I checked the timestamp. Derek's door was closed, and he had been asleep according to the sound recording. The next day I confronted him again. This time I didn't hold back. I asked if he had been entering my room at night, going through my things, or somehow manipulating the space. He laughed, a low, uncomfortable sound. "Why would I do that?" he said again, but there was something in his eyes, a glint, a flicker, that made my stomach turn. I couldn't stay. I started researching ways to break my lease without penalty, but nothing seemed viable. Every night I felt the presence in the apartment, growing bolder. One evening I was on the couch watching TV when I heard a soft humming behind me. I turned slowly. Derek wasn't there. The humming grew louder, more insistent. I followed the sound to the kitchen and froze. The cabinets were open, and my favorite mug was on the floor, shattered. The humming stopped abruptly. That night, I packed a bag and went to a friend's place, planning to crash there until I could figure things out. I left a note for Derek. "I need some space. Don't enter my room. I'm serious." When I returned 2 days later, the apartment felt different. The air was heavier, the shadows longer. My belongings had been moved, though nothing was missing. On my bed was a single piece of paper. "You can't leave." I called the police, but there was little they could do. No forced entry, no signs of a break-in. Everything pointed to someone with access, someone who lived there. I realized with a sinking feeling that Derek wasn't just my roommate. He had been watching me, learning my habits, orchestrating these moments to make me doubt myself, to manipulate me. I spent the next weeks in a state of paranoia. I never knew when he was awake, when he was gone, when he might enter my room. I started sleeping in my clothes with a knife under my pillow. My work suffered. I was constantly on edge, jumpy, unable to focus. Friends noticed my withdrawn behavior. I didn't tell them the full story. Who would believe me? Then came the night that broke me completely. I woke up to the sound of my bedroom door creaking open. I grabbed my phone, shining the flashlight across the room. There, standing at the foot of my bed, was Derek. His face was calm, almost serene, but his eyes were dark, unreadable. He raised a finger to his lips in a shushing gesture. I froze, paralyzed with fear. "I just wanted to make sure you were safe," he whispered. The words made no sense. My heart pounded, and I felt bile rise in my throat. I scrambled for my knife, but he was gone when I turned around. The door was closed, my room empty. I couldn't take it anymore. The next morning, I packed everything I could fit into my car and drove to the outskirts of the city. I found a small sublet, furnished, temporary, and I paid the extra to get out immediately. I didn't tell Derek. I didn't leave a forwarding address. Months passed, but the fear never fully left me. Every time I moved into a new place, I triple-checked locks, windows, doors. I changed my routines, avoided sharing personal information online. The trauma lingered, and nightmares came often. A shadow at the foot of my bed, the feeling of being watched, notes slipped under my pillow. Eventually, I tried to move on. I told myself that what happened was over, that I had escaped, but deep down, I knew it wasn't over. I had no idea what Derek was capable of, no idea how far he would go if he wanted to manipulate or terrorize someone. I never saw him again, never heard from him, and I hoped that was the end. But sometimes, when I'm alone in an apartment late at night, I catch myself glancing at the door, half expecting to see him standing there, calm, watching, waiting. I've learned to trust my instincts, to pay attention to the small things. The sound of a door opening when it shouldn't, a shadow that doesn't belong, the feeling of eyes on the back of your neck. Some people would say it's paranoia. Maybe it is. But after living through what I did, I know better. Sometimes the danger isn't obvious, sometimes it isn't loud, and sometimes it lives right next door, pretending to be harmless. I still live in the city, in a new apartment, with new roommates I trust, or at least I think I do. I've become meticulous about security, about routines, about who has access to my life. Every now and then, I see someone who reminds me of him, a flicker of those same intense eyes, and I feel the old fear rise up, uncontrollable and suffocating. I've learned that some people can hide in plain sight, that horror isn't always a ghost or a criminal. It can be someone who knows your habits, your weaknesses, your routines, and is willing to exploit them for their own amusement or obsession. I've tried to tell my story to friends, to anyone who will listen. Most dismiss it, but a few understand. They know what it's like to have your sanctuary violated, your home turned into a place of terror. And while I've managed to reclaim my life, there's always a shadow lurking at the edge of my awareness, a whisper in my mind reminding me that the world isn't always safe, that some roommate nightmares are all too real. Story the end. I moved into the apartment in January of my junior year. It was a 2-bedroom in a quiet part of Dayton, Ohio, not far from campus. Rent was cheap, the neighborhood seemed safe, and I was desperate to get out of the dorms. My new roommate, Chris, had posted an ad online saying he was looking for someone responsible and quiet. We exchanged a few emails, then met for coffee. He seemed normal, maybe a little intense, but polite, soft-spoken, well-dressed. He told me he was working nights as a security guard and taking online classes. I signed the lease the next day. For the first couple of weeks, things were uneventful. We were on opposite schedules, so I hardly saw him. I'd wake up, go to campus, come home, and find him asleep. At night, while I was studying or watching TV, he'd head out to work. We had a few surface-level conversations about the weather, about groceries, but nothing personal. He kept his room immaculate, never had guests over, and always paid his share of the bills on time. It started small. I'd come home from class and find my things slightly moved, my keys in a different spot, my backpack turned around, my shoes lined up differently by the door. I told myself I was being forgetful. Then food started disappearing. A carton of eggs, a loaf of bread, half a gallon of milk. When I asked Chris, he'd smile faintly and say, "I haven't touched your stuff, man. Maybe you forgot." His eyes would linger a little too long, like he was waiting for me to push back. One night in February, I woke up around 3 a.m. to the sound of footsteps. At first, I thought it was the upstairs neighbors, but the sound was coming from the hallway just outside my door. Soft, deliberate steps like someone pacing. I froze. Then I heard my bedroom door handle jiggle. Just once. My heart hammered. I didn't move, didn't even breathe. After a few seconds, the sound stopped. The apartment went silent again. The next morning, I asked Chris if he'd been up. He said no, smiling in that faint, unreadable way. I laughed it off, but my hands were shaking as I poured my coffee. That day, I bought a small doorstop alarm for my bedroom. I started sleeping with my phone under my pillow. A week later, I came home early from class. The apartment was dark. Chris wasn't supposed to be home. His shift ran until midnight. But as soon as I opened the door, I heard something from his room. Not music, not talking, but a low, steady whispering. I stood in the hallway, straining to hear. It sounded like two people talking, but there was only one voice. My skin crawled. I knocked lightly. The whispering stopped immediately. A few seconds later, Chris opened the door just a crack. His face was pale. "Yeah," he said. I stammered something about needing to grab a book from the living room. He nodded, closed the door, and I heard the lock click. The whispering never resumed. By March, things escalated. I started finding small objects under my bed, things that weren't mine. A broken watch, a child's plastic hair clip, an old Polaroid of a man standing in front of a gas station. Each time I found something, I'd throw it away, but the next week, something new would appear. I stopped inviting friends over because the apartment felt wrong, heavy, like the air itself was tense. One night, just after daylight saving time, I woke up to the doorstop alarm screaming. Someone was pushing on my door. I jumped up, yelling, "Who's there?" The pressure stopped immediately. The alarm shrieked until I turned it off. I called Chris's name. No answer. I opened the door, heart pounding. The hallway was empty. Chris's door was closed. I couldn't sleep after that. I stayed up watching the front door, waiting. Around 4 a.m., I heard Chris's bedroom door open. He walked into the kitchen without turning on the lights, opened the fridge, and just stood there for a long time staring inside. Then he shut the fridge and turned his head slowly toward me. I ducked behind the couch before he could see me. My heart was pounding so hard, I thought he'd hear it. He walked back to his room, silent as a ghost. The next day, I installed a hidden camera in the living room. That night, I stayed at my girlfriend's apartment. When I checked the footage the next morning, my stomach turned cold. Around 2:17 a.m., Chris came out of his room, crouched by my bedroom door, and just sat there for nearly half an hour. He didn't move. He didn't say anything, just sat with his ear pressed against the door. Then he got up, walked to the kitchen, and began opening drawers one by one, taking out knives and setting them on the counter. After a few minutes, he put them all back, walked to the couch, and stared at the camera directly for a full minute, like he knew it was there. Then he smiled and went back to his room. I didn't go home that night. I called the police from my girlfriend's apartment. They sent an officer to do a welfare check. By the time they got there, Chris was gone. His room was empty. His clothes, his laptop, everything. Gone. No note. No forwarding address. Just an empty room and a faint smell of bleach. I moved out within a week. The landlord didn't ask questions, and I didn't offer answers. I threw away the camera and the doorstop alarm. I told my professors I needed time off, and I stayed with my parents for the rest of the semester. A month later, a package showed up at my parents' house. No return address. Inside was a single Polaroid, me sleeping in my childhood bedroom. I never saw Chris again. The police never found him. I've moved 3 times since then, but sometimes late at night I wake up to that same faint sound. Soft footsteps in the hallway, a door handle jiggling once slowly, and I remember the way he looked at the camera, smiling like he was already planning where he'd go next. Story the end. I found the listing on a college housing board. I'd just been accepted into a grad program in Boston and needed a place fast. Rent was outrageous, so when I saw room available, $700 a month, utilities included, in a decent neighborhood, it felt like a miracle. The ad had one blurry photo of a living room with beige walls and an old couch. The poster's name was Tyler. We emailed back and forth a few times before I went to see the place. Tyler seemed normal enough when I met him. Mid-20s, messy brown hair, a bit shy. The apartment was on the 3rd floor of an old Victorian that had been chopped into separate units. The hallway smelled faintly of paint and old wood. The apartment itself was small, but clean, with creaky hardwood floors and windows that rattled when trucks passed by. My room was at the end of the hall, decent size, with a tiny closet. It felt like a good fit. The first few days were uneventful. Tyler mostly stayed in his room, and when he did come out, he was polite, soft-spoken, and always apologizing for being weird. He had a lot of rules posted on sticky notes. Please rinse dishes, no loud music after 10, lock the door. He seemed like an introvert, but harmless. Then, small things started to happen. The first time I noticed was when I came home from class and found my bedroom door wide open. I always locked it. I thought maybe Tyler had come in to fix something, so I asked him. He looked confused and said he hadn't been in there. A few days later, I woke up to the sound of faint scratching, like nails on wood. It was coming from inside my closet. When I opened the door, nothing was there, but the smell of damp earth hit me. My closet was empty, but it felt colder, like standing near an open freezer. I shut the door quickly and told myself it was just the pipes or the building settling. Then my stuff started moving, not disappearing, just moving. My textbooks would be on the opposite side of my desk, my toiletries swapped around in the bathroom. I asked Tyler again if he was going into my room. He denied it, looking genuinely worried. "Are you sure you're not just tired?" he asked. One night, I stayed up late, writing a paper. Around 2 a.m., I heard footsteps in the hallway, slow, heavy, deliberate. Tyler's room was at the opposite end, but the sound stopped right outside my door. I sat frozen, waiting. Then the doorknob turned slightly, just a small movement. My heart was pounding. I whispered, "Tyler?" No answer. The knob stopped moving. The next morning, I brought it up. Tyler looked pale. "I've heard it too," he said quietly. "I thought it was you." From then on, the apartment felt different. The air seemed heavier, colder. Sometimes when I was in the kitchen, I'd feel a presence behind me, like someone was standing just out of reach. Once, while brushing my teeth, I caught a glimpse of something in the bathroom mirror. A tall, thin figure with dark, sunken eyes, standing just behind me. When I spun around, no one was there. I bought a cheap security camera and pointed it at my bedroom door. That night, I slept with the light on. At 3:14 a.m., I woke up to the scratching again, this time louder. It was coming from under my bed. I froze, clutching my blanket, and waited for it to stop. When I checked the footage in the morning, my heart nearly stopped. At 3:11 a.m., the door to my room creaked open slowly. A figure slipped inside, tall, gaunt, wearing what looked like old torn clothing. Its head hung at an unnatural angle. It crouched at the foot of my bed, staring at me. Its fingers were long, almost skeletal. It stayed like that for a full 2 minutes, then slid under my bed like smoke. The door never closed. I showed the video to Tyler. His hands shook as he watched. "I told you something was off," he whispered. "I've seen it too, in my room." He told me he'd been waking up with scratches on his arms and legs, cold spots in his bed. He thought he was going crazy until I moved in and started noticing it too. We tried calling the landlord, but the number was disconnected. We looked up the address and found old news articles. In 1974, a man who lived in that unit had killed his roommate and buried him in the basement crawl space. Police had supposedly removed the body, but rumors said they never found all the remains. After that, nights became unbearable. Doors would slam on their own. The scratching turned into whispers, muffled, angry voices coming from the walls. Sometimes I'd wake up to find muddy footprints leading from my closet to the hallway. Tyler started sleeping at his girlfriend's place, leaving me alone in the apartment. One night, I couldn't take it anymore. I packed my things, planning to leave at dawn. Around 4 a.m., as I zipped my last bag, I heard the closet door creak open. Slowly. I turned and saw it, crawling out from the darkness. Its eyes were completely black, its mouth hanging open wider than a human's should. Its fingers dug into the floorboards as it dragged itself forward. I bolted for the door, yanking it open just as the lights flickered. In the hallway mirror, I caught one last glimpse of it, standing upright now, its head cocked, watching me run. I never went back. Tyler texted me a week later saying he was moving out too. The unit went back up for rent within a month. I still check the listing sometimes. New people always move in. The ad always looks the same. I never forgot the smell of damp earth in my closet, or the sound of it crawling, or the way it looked at me like it knew me, like it had been waiting for me. Even now, years later in a different city, sometimes I wake up in the middle of the night and swear I hear scratching under my bed. I keep my closet door shut and locked, but it doesn't matter. I know it doesn't need doors. It waits. Story. The end. I moved to Chicago in the fall after graduating college. My plan was simple: get a job, find an apartment I could afford, and finally have a space of my own. But the reality of the rental market hit hard, and I quickly realized I couldn't afford a place alone. That's when I started looking for a roommate. I found a listing on a popular housing website. The apartment was in an older building in Logan Square, a bit rundown but with character. The ad read, "Quiet, respectful roommate wanted. I work nights. Looking for someone responsible, no parties." It seemed perfect. The roommate, Mark, was 28, a bit taller than me, with dark hair that always seemed messy and an energy that was almost off. He smiled politely when I came to meet him, shook my hand firmly, and gave me a quick tour of the apartment. The place was small but livable. 2 bedrooms, 1 bathroom, a narrow kitchen, and a tiny living room. He had a few personal things out, some clothes, a couple of framed photos, and an old couch. But otherwise, the apartment was clean and strangely empty. He didn't talk much during the tour, just answered my questions with short responses. He said he worked nights at a call center, so we'd rarely see each other. I moved in the following weekend. The first week was fine. Mark stuck to his schedule, leaving for work at odd hours and returning when I was asleep. We were friendly but distant, which suited me. Then the small things began. At first, it was subtle. I'd come home and notice the living room chair slightly moved. A kitchen towel that had been folded neatly was unfolded. I chalked it up to me being forgetful or maybe the wind from an open window. One night, I woke up around 2 in the morning because the bedroom door creaked. I live alone with Mark out, so I froze. Slowly, I heard footsteps moving across the hallway, then the faint scraping of shoes against the hardwood floor. I kept perfectly still, telling myself it was just the building settling. But the next night, it happened again. And this time, I could hear him whispering my name, barely audible, like he was right outside the door. I confronted him the next morning. "Hey, have you been coming into my room at night?" Mark looked genuinely confused. "No, why would I do that?" It was the first time I felt uneasy around him. The confusion in his eyes didn't match the sinking feeling in my stomach. After that, I started noticing more disturbing things. Food disappearing. My mail opened. Items from my desk moved or missing entirely. And every time I asked, he denied it with the same calm, practiced tone. "You probably forgot where you put it." I began locking my bedroom door every night. I installed a cheap motion sensor camera in my room, just to have some evidence. The first night, the camera caught him standing in my doorway, staring at me while I slept. When I woke, he was gone. I tried to rationalize everything. He worked nights. Maybe he just came in to check the apartment while I was asleep, I told myself. But the notes started appearing. It began with one. I woke up to find a small sticky note on my nightstand that read, "I watch when you sleep." I assumed it was a sick joke and threw it away. But more appeared, under my pillow, in my shoes, on my desk. Each one more specific. "You toss and turn a lot. You dream of him. I see the way you look at your door." The police advised me to leave the apartment, but I felt trapped. Breaking the lease meant losing hundreds of dollars I didn't have. I tried confronting Mark again, recording the conversation this time. He answered calmly, almost too calmly, "I don't know what you're talking about. I respect your space." One night, I was woken by a sound like whispering right next to my ear. I snapped awake to find the room dark and empty, but the unmistakable feeling of someone sitting on the edge of my bed lingered. My heart was pounding so hard I could barely breathe. I packed a bag that night and went to a friend's apartment across town. I left Mark a note saying I was leaving, hoping that would be enough. The next morning, I got a text from an unknown number. It read, "Leaving so soon? You don't understand yet. I know everything." I called the police and explained, but there was little they could do. I moved in with a friend and started applying for new apartments far from Logan Square. Weeks later, I got a package at my friend's apartment. Inside was a small journal, bound in black leather. Flipping through, I found page after page of notes, detailed observations of me, what time I woke up, what I ate, the exact words I used while talking. Some pages had sketches of my room, my belongings, even the camera I had installed. At the very end, a message in careful handwriting, "You belong to me now, even if you run." I never stayed in another shared apartment again. I changed my phone number, switched jobs, and moved several states away. But every night, I still feel like someone is watching, like I can hear soft footsteps outside my bedroom door waiting. Story the end. When I first met Chris, he seemed like the kind of guy who could become a good friend. He was quiet but friendly, polite without being overly formal, and didn't come off as threatening in any way. I had just gotten accepted into a graduate program at a university in the Midwest, and finding affordable housing near campus was harder than I thought it would be. I ended up on a Facebook housing group where Chris had posted about needing a roommate to fill the second bedroom in his apartment. The photos he uploaded showed a modest two-bedroom unit in an older building, nothing fancy but workable. Rent was low, utilities were split, and the location was perfect, only a 15-minute walk from campus. When I went to see the place, Chris was sitting on the couch, laptop on his knees, watching some muted movie while typing something into his computer. He looked up, smiled faintly, and introduced himself. He was lanky, maybe late 20s, with a mop of unkempt brown hair and wire-rimmed glasses. The apartment was a little cluttered, but not dirty. I figured, what the hell, it was affordable and he didn't seem weird. We signed the lease together a week later, and I moved in at the start of the semester. At first, living with Chris was unremarkable. He kept to himself, usually stayed in his room with the door closed, and when I did see him, he was either at his computer or heating something in the microwave. We'd exchange pleasantries, a hey man here or how's it going there, but that was it. He didn't have visitors, never mentioned friends or family, and didn't talk about work, though I assumed he must have had some kind of remote job because he never seemed to leave. It was about 3 weeks in when little things started feeling off. I'd wake up in the middle of the night and swear I heard the floor creaking outside my door. I chalked it up to the old building settling. Sometimes when I'd go into the kitchen in the morning, a chair would be slightly pulled out from the table, or a cabinet door would be ajar. Harmless things, things I could brush off. But once I came home and found the bathroom light on with the door shut. I knocked. No answer. Opened it, and nobody was inside. Chris was in his room the whole time. The first real incident happened I was asleep when I woke up to the faint sound of my bedroom door clicking. I had locked it out of habit. Something about Chris's quietness made me uneasy enough to do that. The knob jiggled softly but deliberately, like someone was testing it. I froze, every muscle tight. It stopped after a moment, and I listened hard. I could hear soft footsteps receding down the hall. I didn't sleep the rest of the night. The next morning, I asked Chris casually if he'd been up late. He blinked at me like I was speaking another language and shook his head. No. Why? I didn't push it. After that, I started paying closer attention. Chris was secretive. He always kept his bedroom door locked, even when he left. I accidentally walked past once when he was coming out, and I caught a glimpse of the inside before he shut it. There were papers taped to the walls, dozens of them, covered in writing too small and cluttered to read from a distance. His blinds were taped shut with black duct tape, and I noticed he had 3 separate locks on his window. When he caught me glancing in, his face hardened in a way I hadn't seen before. "Don't look in my room," he said flatly, then shut the door. From that point, I couldn't shake the feeling that something was seriously wrong with him. I began hearing him talking in his room late at night, but it didn't sound like phone calls. The voice was low, rushed, almost like chanting. Sometimes it would go on for hours. Other nights, I'd wake up to what sounded like pacing, back and forth, the floorboards creaking in a steady rhythm. Once, I swear I heard scratching on the wall we shared. One night, around 2 a.m., I went to the kitchen to get water. The apartment was pitch black, except for a faint glow under Chris's door. As I poured my drink, I heard his door click open behind me. I froze. He stepped out silently, and I saw his silhouette move across the hallway toward the living room. He didn't acknowledge me. I stayed completely still, heart pounding, until he drifted back to his room 10 minutes later and shut the door. The paranoia began to eat at me. I couldn't concentrate in class, couldn't relax at home. I kept wondering if he was going through my things while I was gone. So one afternoon, I left my phone recording in my bedroom while I went out for groceries. When I came back and checked it, my stomach dropped. The audio captured the sound of my door opening. Slow footsteps entered the room. There was silence for a long stretch, then the faint sound of drawers opening, papers rustling. At one point, He whispered something too softly for the mic to catch. After maybe 15 minutes, the footsteps left and the door closed again. I didn't know what to do. If I confronted him, he might get angry, and I had no idea what he was capable of. But moving out wasn't simple either. I didn't have the money, and the lease locked me in for a year. I told myself I'd just keep locking my door and watch my back. Things escalated. I started finding my stuff in places I hadn't left it. A notebook I always kept in my backpack was suddenly on my desk. My toothbrush was damp when I hadn't used it. My sheets smelled faintly of something chemical, like cleaner, even though I hadn't washed them. Once, I found a small slip of paper under my pillow with what looked like numbers scribbled on it in tight, frantic handwriting. One night, I woke up to the sound of breathing in my room. My heart almost stopped. I reached for the lamp and flicked it on. Nothing. The room was empty, the door still locked, but I swear the sound had been right next to me. The breaking point came in the middle of winter. I was lying in bed, trying to sleep, when I heard it again, the doorknob turning, softly. Then, a click. The lock gave way. My door creaked open an inch. I sat up, terrified, and saw Chris's eye peering through the gap. Just his eye, wide and bloodshot, staring at me. We locked eyes for maybe 5 seconds, both frozen. Then he shut the door quietly and walked away. I didn't sleep that night. I didn't sleep much at all after that. The next day, I skipped class and stayed home, waiting until I heard him leave. Then I went into his room. My hands shook as I unlocked the door with a knife blade. I'd seen him use the lock before, and it was simple. Inside, the room was worse than I imagined. The walls were covered with pages torn from notebooks, filled with microscopic handwriting, strange symbols, and strings of numbers. Some pages had names on them, none I recognized except my own, written several times. My name was scrawled across one page in red ink, surrounded by circles and arrows pointing to random words. In the corner of the room was a stack of shoeboxes. Inside one, I found items that made my blood run cold. My missing socks, wrappers from food I had eaten, even a water bottle I'd thrown away. He had been keeping my trash. In another box, I found Polaroid photos, dozens of them, all of me, sleeping, eating, studying. Some were taken through the crack of my bedroom door. One was of me brushing my teeth, the mirror reflecting my face. Another was of me lying in bed, mouth slightly open, completely unaware. I dropped the box and staggered back, heart racing. That's when I heard the front door open. Chris was home. I panicked, shoving the boxes back where I found them, but there was no way to hide that I had been in his room. I slipped out and ran into my bedroom, locking the door. My pulse pounded in my ears as I listened to his footsteps in the hall. He paused outside my room. Then, slowly, I heard him try the knob. Once, twice. Then, silence. That night was the longest of my life. I sat awake, clutching a kitchen knife, every creak of the building setting me on edge. The next morning, I packed a bag and left. I told the landlord there was an emergency and I couldn't stay. I ended up crashing on a friend's couch until I found another place. I never went back for the rest of my stuff. I didn't want to see him again. Weeks later, I checked the Facebook housing group where I'd first found his post. His listing was back up, looking for a new roommate. I still wonder what might have happened if I hadn't left when I did. Story the end. I'd been living in San Antonio for about 6 months when I decided to take on a roommate. My lease had gone up, and I couldn't afford the place by myself anymore. It was a small but decent 2-bedroom apartment in a quiet neighborhood off Bandera Road. The building was older, but the unit had hardwood floors and a balcony overlooking a courtyard with a pool. I'd grown attached to it and didn't want to move out. I posted an ad online and got a handful of responses. Most were flaky or strange, but one stood out. Her name was Emily. She wrote a polite, detailed email explaining that she'd just moved to town for a nursing job and needed a place immediately. She even attached a picture of herself, a petite brunette, smiling in a white sweater. She looked normal, clean-cut. I figured a nurse would make an ideal roommate, someone responsible, probably gone a lot due to work, and trustworthy. Emily moved in the following week. She paid her share of the rent in cash, showed me her ID, and seemed polite, if a bit shy. She worked nights at the hospital, which meant I had the apartment to myself most evenings. During the day, she slept quietly in her room. It all seemed perfect. The first month was uneventful. Emily didn't cook much, kept to herself, and never had guests. We made small talk here and there about work or the weather, but she mostly stayed in her room. I barely noticed her. Then little things started happening. At first, it was just odd. I'd wake up in the morning to find the living room blinds drawn tightly shut, even though I always left them open. My keys would be moved from the kitchen counter to the coffee table. A half-empty bottle of water I'd left by my bed would be gone the next morning. It was small stuff, easy to dismiss, but it didn't stop. One night I came home late from work and found Emily standing in the kitchen in total darkness. No lights, just her silhouette against the dim glow from the microwave clock. "You scared me," I said with a nervous laugh. She didn't react at first, then slowly turned her head toward me and said, "You shouldn't come home so late. It's not safe." Her voice was calm, but something about the way she said it made my stomach twist. From that night on, I started locking my bedroom door. A week later, I woke up around 3 a.m. to the sound of my doorknob rattling, soft at first, then harder. My heart raced. I sat up in bed, holding my breath, clutching my phone. The rattling stopped. I stared at the shadow of the door for what felt like forever before I finally heard footsteps retreat down the hallway. The next morning, Emily acted normal, making tea in the kitchen, scrolling through her phone. I didn't mention the door. I didn't want to believe it had been her. Then my things started disappearing. A shirt I loved vanished from my closet. My toothbrush was damp in the morning, even when I hadn't used it. Once I found my laptop open to a blank document when I was sure I'd left it closed. I decided to confront her one evening. "Hey, Emily, listen, I've been noticing things. Like, my stuff's been moved around. Were you in my room?" She looked up slowly from the couch, eyes blank. "Why would I go into your room?" "Because someone did," I said, trying to keep my voice steady. She stared for a long time before answering. "You should lock your door better. People can get in." It wasn't a denial. It wasn't an apology. It was a warning. That night I pushed a chair under my doorknob and slept with a heavy flashlight in my hand. Around 4 a.m., I woke to hear soft scratching at the door. A whisper, too faint to make out. The chair shifted under the knob. I sat frozen, muscles locked, staring at the door. After a few minutes, the sound stopped. The next day, Emily was gone when I got up. Her door was shut, but something about it looked wrong, like it had been opened and closed multiple times overnight. Things escalated from there. I'd come home to find her standing at the balcony door, staring out at nothing, lights off. Sometimes she'd be in the bathroom with the faucet running, door open, no explanation. She started asking me strange questions, like, "Do you ever feel like someone's watching you? And if someone wanted to hurt you, do you think you'd notice before it was too late?" I stopped sleeping. I started staying at work late, spending weekends at friends' places. I was terrified to be alone with her, but breaking the lease wasn't an option. I didn't have the money. Then one evening, I came home and found my bedroom completely ransacked. Drawers open, clothes thrown everywhere, my mattress pulled halfway off the frame. Nothing stolen, just violated. My stomach dropped. I went to Emily's door and knocked hard. "What the hell is going on?" I yelled. No answer. I knocked again. "Emily, did you go through my stuff?" The door opened slowly. Emily stood there in the dark, eyes wide, holding something I couldn't see. "You shouldn't leave things where people can find them," she said softly. I backed away, heart racing. I grabbed my phone, my bag, and left the apartment without looking back. That night, I slept in my car. The next day, I called the landlord, explaining everything in a trembling voice. "I can't live here anymore," I said. "I don't feel safe." "Emily?" the landlord said when I mentioned her name. "We don't have an Emily on your lease." My stomach dropped. "What do you mean? She's been living here for 2 months." The landlord was silent for a moment, then said, "You're the only tenant listed. You've been paying full rent on that unit since June." I felt dizzy. "No, she's here. She gave me cash for her share." "You need to call the police," the landlord interrupted. When the police arrived, Emily was gone. Her room was empty, stripped bare. No clothes, no personal items, nothing but a bare mattress. There was no trace of her. The ID she'd shown me turned out to be fake. Weeks later, I saw a news story about a woman arrested in Dallas for breaking into apartments and living in them undetected, targeting single renters. Her mugshot was Emily's face. She'd been charged with stalking and unlawful entry, but there were rumors she'd done much worse elsewhere. I still get chills thinking about it. Every night I'd slept in that apartment. I had no idea who I was really living with, or what she might have done if I'd stayed any longer. Story the end. When I first moved out of my parents' house, I didn't have the luxury of being picky about where I lived. I was 22, fresh out of college with a journalism degree, and working at a small local paper that barely paid enough to cover rent, groceries, and gas. Living alone wasn't an option, so when I came across an ad for a roommate on Craigslist, I jumped on it. The rent was cheap for the area, the apartment was close to my job, and the guy seemed normal enough from his messages. His name was Daniel, though he told me to call him Danny. When I met him for the first time, he was friendly in that way that felt a little too practiced, but I told myself I was just being overly cautious. He was 26, worked in IT, and said he'd been living in the apartment for almost a year, but needed a new roommate because his last one had suddenly moved out. That part should have been a red flag, but he brushed it off with a laugh, saying the guy had gotten a job offer out of state and left on short notice. The apartment itself was modest but decent. 2 bedrooms, a small living room, and a kitchen that had definitely seen better days. Still, it was clean, affordable, and the lease paperwork checked out. I moved in 2 weeks later with my mattress, a couple boxes of clothes, and my laptop. For the first few weeks, everything seemed fine. Danny was quiet, almost too quiet. He spent most of his time in his room, only coming out for food or to go to work. He wasn't messy, which I appreciated, and we had casual conversations in the kitchen sometimes. He'd ask about my day, and I'd ask about his. He didn't volunteer much about himself, but I didn't pry. The first time I noticed something strange was late one night. I'd fallen asleep on the couch while working on an article. Around 2 a.m., I woke up suddenly, the kind of wake up where you don't know why, but your body just knows something isn't right. The apartment was decked for the glow of my laptop screen. And then I noticed Danny. He was standing in the hallway, just watching me. I sat up, startled, and he stepped back like he hadn't realized I'd seen him. "Sorry, man," he muttered quickly. "Didn't mean to freak you out. Just went to get some water." I nodded, trying to brush it off, but my heart was racing. He didn't have a glass in his hand, and he hadn't gone into the kitchen. Still, I told myself not to overthink it. Maybe he was half asleep. But after that, I couldn't shake the uneasy feeling. I started noticing small things. My bedroom door, always closed when I left, would sometimes be cracked open when I came home. A couple of my things, my toothbrush and notebook, weren't where I'd left them. One time, my laptop was on when I was sure I'd shut it down. I tried to convince myself I was just being paranoid. Moving in with a stranger was bound to feel weird at first, but then there was the night I woke up to the sound of my bedroom door slowly creaking open. I froze. The room was pitch dark, and I didn't move, barely even breathed. Through the sliver of open door, I could see a shadow standing there. It wasn't the trick of the light. I could hear breathing, slow and steady. "Danny?" I whispered. The shadow didn't move. Then, after a few long, suffocating seconds, the door closed again. I heard footsteps padding softly down the hall. The next morning, I confronted him. I asked if he'd come into my room last night. He looked at me with this blank expression and said, "Why would I do that?" His tone was flat, like I'd asked something stupid. I pressed a little, but he just shook his head and muttered, "You must have been dreaming." I wanted to believe him, but deep down, I knew I hadn't dreamed it. From then on, I started locking my door at night. Danny never commented on it, but I noticed how he'd look at my doorknob sometimes, like he was annoyed by it. Another month went by, and the tension kept building. One Saturday, I came home from visiting my parents and found Danny sitting in the living room staring at the TV, though it wasn't even on. He didn't say hi. He didn't even acknowledge me. Just sat there, expressionless. I went into my room, but something felt off. My desk drawers were slightly open, and one of my journals was lying on top, flipped open to a page I hadn't left it on. My stomach dropped. Danny had been in my room. That night, I heard him pacing the hallway for hours, just walking back and forth, back and forth. I barely slept. A few days later, while he was at work, I decided to look around his room. I knew it was a terrible idea, but I couldn't take the not knowing anymore. His door wasn't locked, The first thing that hit me was the smell. Stale, sour, like sweat and something metallic. The room was dark, the blinds drawn tight. His bed was a bare mattress, no sheets, no blanket. But what really made my blood run cold was the desk. On it, he had several notebooks, all filled with writing. At first, I thought they were journals, but when I flipped through one, I realized every page was covered with names. Some I recognized, the names of people from our building, coworkers I'd mentioned, even my own family members. My name was written dozens of times, circled over and over. In another notebook, there were strange sketches, drawings of faces, crude but detailed, faces of people I knew, faces of me. Some of them had their eyes crossed out, others with their mouths sewn shut. I wanted to get out right then, but as I turned to leave, I noticed something in the corner of the room. A box. Inside were personal items, things that didn't belong to him. I saw a woman's hairbrush, a pair of glasses, even a wallet with someone else's ID. My chest tightened as I realized these must have belonged to his previous roommates. Maybe even other people. I shoved everything back where it was and left the room, my hands shaking. I knew I couldn't stay there any longer. I needed to find a way out without tipping him off. That night, I packed a bag and planned to crash at a coworker's place, but when I tried to leave, Danny was standing by the door, just standing there like he'd been waiting. "Going somewhere?" he asked, his voice calm but his eyes locked on me. I stammered something about staying with a friend. He stared at me for what felt like forever before finally stepping aside. "All right," he said. "See you later." I left and never went back. The next day, I called the landlord and told him I was moving out immediately. I didn't explain why, I just said it wasn't working out. I grabbed the rest of my things while Danny was at work and got out of there as fast as I could. A week later, I heard from another tenant in the building that Danny had a new roommate already. I still think about those notebooks, about the names and faces. I wonder what happened to the people who came before me. And sometimes I wonder what would have happened if I hadn't trusted my instincts, if I'd stayed just a little longer. But I'll never forget the look in his eyes when he watched me leave, like he knew exactly what I'd seen, like he knew I'd figured him out. And I'll never forget how relieved I felt when I locked the door of my new place that night, knowing he wasn't on the other side. But sometimes, when I'm lying in bed late at night, I swear I can feel it again, that same sensation of someone standing in the doorway, watching me breathe. Story the end.